of Reagan. Remember Reagan as an American president? Yeah? And back even before Reagan. And Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were famous friends. Who knows if they're really friends, but anyway, you know, it was politically good for them to at least work together again. Back in the time. Okay? Margaret Thatcher agreed with Reagan to say that we've got to treat terrorists. Here's a new word in the dictionary, terrorists. We have to treat these people no longer as armed soldiers who are fighting for their independence. They are criminals. They are terrorists. And that made a big change in the way the prisons were organized. In Northern Ireland then, what happened was they built new prisons in a place called Long Kesh. The Long Kesh prisons were built in the shape of a capital letter H. Right? So they became known as the H block. In Ireland we call it H. We call it the H block. And the joke was, of course, it's the hate block. Yeah? So relax if your block makes a letter H, okay? In the H block, people from all sides of the conflict were imprisoned together. And in these H blocks was the new regime, where the British Army said, we're going to get tough with these prisoners to try and end this armed conflict, or what many of us call pure terrorism. And that's something that's interesting for you maybe to take away from this play. The question in your mind about what makes a terrorist, and who defines terrorism, and how do we decide what is a war and what isn't a war? And who makes those sort of decisions for us? Because if you think about it, you could say to yourself, isn't any war an act of terrorism? Certainly for civilians. You can also say to yourself, well, okay, if you have one side that's well organized, and you have another side that wants to resist, then Shemprey, the resisting side who aren't so well organized, have to find some way of trying to win their war. But the names we give to people are very often decided by the rich and powerful. So, yes, I might say to myself, you know, these people are terrorists. But if I came from that place, might I not say to myself that the other side are the terrorists? So maybe the words we use also depends on what side you're sitting on, huh? Or standing on. Think about it, and think about, it's not an easy question. It's not an easy thing to decide for yourselves. And there are many, many complicated issues. And yes, I think any of us should always remember that people are being killed in any of these acts of armed aggression. And perhaps that's what's most important to me. But for those who have very strong beliefs that they are fighting for their independence, how do we treat them? And how does a government treat them? And how does a government treat any act of people who want to resist or who want to speak a different voice? And maybe that's the basic question behind the play, of how does anybody treat anybody with a different voice? Many governments are dictators. And if there was certainly a lot of cruelty, a lot of injustice in Northern Ireland between the Irish and the British, and certainly on both sides, we can also say that governments who are supposed to be responsible and to speak one message publicly should at least stay truthful and honest. And when we start hearing stories about people being tortured in H block, we kind of say to ourselves, you know, what is this government? And for us in Ireland, and certainly for British people, they think of their own government as, wow, we're clean. And I think it was a shock for many people to find out that the British government was engaged, and probably still is engaged, in torture. Certainly in the Northern Ireland camps, there was what we may describe as torture taking place. On the slides, you will see some of the people in the prisons who resisted the British government. They wanted to still call themselves soldiers and to recognize that their fight was a dignified fight and that it was an armed conflict, a war. They still wanted to be treated as prisoners of war. They resisted being called criminals, and they resisted being called terrorists. They refused, therefore, to wear the prison uniform. That was one of their first steps. Well, you refuse to wear the prison uniform because you want to wear your own clothes, right? What is the other side going to say to you? The ones in charge. Hey, uniforms are a very hot issue here on Ateneo campus, right? And what you can wear and what you can't wear, and where you can wear it and where you can't wear it. And you as students might even be asking yourselves, how can we protest the wearing or the not wearing of certain items of clothing, right? So yes, politics happens everywhere. In the prisons, the IRA prisoners said, we refuse to wear the signs of criminals, so we refuse to wear prison clothing. The prison governor said, fine, you don't want to wear clothing, you refuse to wear our clothing, we're still taking away your clothing. You are not allowed to wear your own clothing, you must wear prison clothing. So, the prisoner said, get the idea? Because the prisoners, you have to remember, in Ireland it's not a me. It's not like here. So they began to wear blankets. Because after all, they were still allowed blankets in their cells. And the protest became known as the blanket protest. And you will see it in the slideshow, guys wearing blankets. Right? There's nothing else there, folks. Watch closely, but you'll see nothing else. They also then were forbidden to get their army haircut, or their prisoners' haircut. And the prisoners, regular shape. So the guy's hair was growing very long. Because, believe it or not, this protest continued over years. Right? So you're going to see in the slides people with very long men, with very long hair, long beards, and kind of wrapped in these very gray blankets. Nothing happened. The government didn't change. So the next step that the prisoners decided to take, right, was we've got to do something more to force the issue. Who now? Sorry. Because they were just wearing blankets, remember what it's like in a prison, right? You're small, if you know prison regime, you have to go out to the showers or whatever. When the prisoners were going out to the shower rooms, because they were only wearing blankets and nothing underneath, the prison guards decided, this is a good time to have some fun. Right? Now, guys are probably a bit more knowledgeable about the kind of fun that might take place between, the have or the strong side and the weaker side who've just got blankets, right? Females, you just have to imagine what the prison guards did to the prisoners. But there was, again, a lot of brutality between the prison guards and the prisoners who were naked underneath these blankets. Imagining it? Imagine it